I mean, I know the gospel is important. Of course, I'm a believer too. But honestly, I've heard it so much that it just feels familiar, you know? Every sermon kind of sounds the same. Gospel, salvation. It all just comes across like church talk sometimes. And look, I try to be faithful in my walk. I really do. So part of me thinks, isn't this enough? Sure, faith matters, but there are real life issues too. Kids' education, parents' health, work, all of it. Aren't those things also God-given responsibilities? I can't live clinging only to the gospel. This feels like my reality. Doesn't it make more sense to keep some balance? It seems many believers think this way about the gospel. However, we may have heard the gospel so often that we no longer grasp its true value. The gospel is not just another religious theory. This alone, is the reality of our eternal destiny. God gave the only news of salvation to mankind who had fallen into despair because of sin. That is the gospel. The gospel was not made by man, but it is the greatest message of grace that God Himself has bestowed. It is the gospel of God, so far beyond that it makes the proclamation of an emperor seem trivial. This is the only good news given to those who wander in sin and hopelessness, and it is the most joyful news that mankind can ever receive from God. Human beings are held captive by the dreadful, irresistible power of sin. By nature, they are self-centered, judging and acting out of selfish desire. They ought to love people and use things, but instead they love things and use people to obtain them. For their own gain, they practice lies and deceit, and, if necessary, they drive the innocent into destruction. They do not hesitate to take revenge on anyone who refuses to satisfy their selfishness. To reassure themselves while joining hands with a false world, they say, "This is the only life I've got." Yet the fear of death and of the eternal punishment that follows never truly goes away. From this desperate reality, God has saved us, and this good news is the gospel. To proclaim this news to all humanity, God Himself called Paul and set him apart. Paul was sent to preach the gospel, not by the will of men, nor by his own choice. In fact, while on the road to Damascus to destroy the church, he met the Lord, who said to him, "Why are you persecuting me?" In that moment of shock, he realized that God had set him apart from the gospel. From then on, he dedicated his life to preaching the gospel, enduring every suffering and hardship. And as a result, we too have heard this message of salvation. The baton of the gospel, which the forebears of faith kept at the cost of their lives, is now in our hands. The gospel is the fruit of God's unceasing work and the only message of salvation given to mankind, who had fallen into despair because of sin. Whether it will be passed on or stop with us depends on our choice. The Lord who used Paul is still at work even now. Yet the time given to us is running out, while people are rushing toward destruction. Now is the time to treasure the gospel. Now is the time to dedicate ourselves. Now is the time to share in the joy of God. Let us open our eyes to the absolute value of the gospel, and let us give our lives to pass this baton of eternal love to the next runner.